Marcus Whitehorse's hands froze on the massive bear's matted fur, river water still dripping from both their bodies onto the rocky Colorado shoreline. The crowd of hikers who had gathered to watch the dramatic rescue fell into absolute silence. The bear wasn't breathing. Then, without warning, those ancient brown eyes snapped open and locked directly onto Marcus's face. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers as several people stumbled backward, one woman's thermos clattering against the stones. The bear's massive head tilted slightly, studying the man who had just pulled him from the churning rapids with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Martha Stonecrow, Marcus's Cherokee grandmother, whispered from the crowd, "Sweet Jesus, that ain't no ordinary bear." Her weathered hands clutched the worn leather pouch containing her late husband's ashes, the same husband who had always told her that some spirits returned to protect their blood. "Nobody move," Marcus commanded, though his own voice trembled with uncertainty. What had he just saved, and why did those eyes seem to recognize him? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months before that fateful moment at the river, Marcus Whitehorse had been a different man entirely. At 32, he carried the weight of 3 generations on his shoulders, half Cherokee blood from his father's side, and the stubborn determination of Irish settlers from his mother's. The Rocky Mountain National Park had been his sanctuary for 8 years, ever since he'd taken over his father's ranger position after Thomas Whitehorse died in what everyone called a hunting accident. Everyone except Marcus. The modest cabin where 3 generations of Whitehorses had lived sat precariously close to foreclosure. Medical bills from his mother Eleanor's breast cancer treatment had mounted like an avalanche, $180,000 and climbing. The experimental treatments their insurance wouldn't cover cost more than Marcus made in 2 years as a park ranger. Each morning, he'd find his 58-year-old mother hunched over the kitchen table, surrounded by bills marked "Final Notice" in angry red letters. "We could sell the cabin, Marcus," Eleanor would say, her voice hollow from chemotherapy. "Your father's gone. This place, it's just wood and memories now." But Martha Stonecrow, his 77-year-old grandmother, would shake her gray head firmly. "This land holds the spirits of our ancestors, Eleanor. You don't sell your soul to pay your debts." Martha's weathered hands would trace the intricate beadwork on her traditional shawl, a family heirloom that had survived 3 generations. "Besides, my boy's got his daddy's heart. He'll find another way." The other way had presented itself in the form of Victor Kozlov, a smooth-talking businessman who claimed to represent a wildlife conservation group. Victor had approached Marcus quietly one autumn evening, offering what seemed like a miracle, enough money to cover Eleanor's treatments and save the cabin. All Marcus had to do was look the other way when certain hunting parties came through the park's remote areas. "Your father was a stubborn man," Victor had said, his Russian accent barely detectable after decades in America. "Stubborn men don't live long in these mountains, Marcus, but practical men, they take care of their families." Marcus had refused, but the seed of temptation had been planted. Every time he watched his mother wince in pain, every time another bill arrived, Victor's offer echoed in his mind like a persistent whisper. The family's financial desperation was a closely guarded secret in their small Colorado community. Marcus worked double shifts, taking on maintenance jobs at local ranches after his ranger duties ended. Eleanor had sold her wedding ring, her grandmother's china, and nearly everything of value they owned. Only Martha's Social Security check and Marcus's modest salary kept them afloat. "Your daddy used to say," Martha would remind Marcus during their darkest moments, "a man ain't measured by what he takes from this world, but by what he leaves behind for the critters who can't speak for themselves." She'd pause, studying her grandson's troubled face. "But even the good Lord understands when a man's got to choose between his principles and his family." That choice would soon become more complicated than any of them could imagine. The morning Marcus first encountered the bear that would change everything started like any other October day in the Rockies. Frost clung to the pine needles as he made his early patrol rounds, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp mountain air. He'd been following what appeared to be unusual tracking patterns, deep gouges in tree bark too high for elk, scat that didn't match any local species he knew. The sound hit him first, a low, agonized moan that seemed to echo from the earth itself. Marcus followed the noise through a dense grove of aspens, their golden leaves carpeting the forest floor like scattered coins. What he found in the small clearing made his blood run cold. A massive black bear, easily 400 pounds, lay trapped in what could only be described as a military-grade snare. The cable was embedded so deeply into the animal's left hind leg that blood had pooled beneath it, staining the fallen leaves crimson. But it was the bear's face that stopped Marcus cold. A distinctive scar ran from its left ear down to its muzzle, giving it an almost human expression of resigned suffering. "Easy there, big fella," Marcus whispered, slowly approaching with his hands visible. The bear's eyes tracked his movement, but instead of the wild panic he expected, Marcus saw something that made him question everything he knew about wildlife behavior. The bear was watching him with what could only be described as recognition, as if it had been waiting for him specifically. Working carefully with his multi-tool and emergency supplies, Marcus spent nearly 2 hours freeing the animal. The bear never once tried to attack, though it easily could have killed him with a single swipe. Instead, it seemed to understand that Marcus was helping, even lifting its injured leg to give him better access to the snare. When the cable finally snapped free, the bear didn't immediately flee as Marcus expected. Instead, it sat back on its haunches and stared at him with those impossibly intelligent dark eyes. Then, in a gesture that would haunt Marcus for months to come, the bear slowly nodded, actually nodded, before limping away into the forest. Marcus reported the incident as a routine wildlife assistance call, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had happened. He began carrying apples on his patrols, leaving them near the site where he'd found the bear. Without fail, they disappeared overnight. 3 weeks later, the bear returned. Marcus was checking trail markers near Elk Meadow when movement in his peripheral vision made him freeze. The bear, he could tell it was the same one from the distinctive scar, stood about 50 yards away, simply watching him. When Marcus slowly reached into his pack and pulled out an apple, the bear approached with a calm confidence that defied every wildlife safety protocol Marcus had ever learned. "You're not supposed to be this comfortable around humans," Marcus said softly, rolling the apple across the ground. The bear picked it up delicately, ate it in 2 bites, then did something that made Marcus's heart skip. It arranged 3 small stones in a perfect triangle before disappearing back into the trees. The stone arrangements became a regular occurrence. Triangles, straight lines, even what looked like crude arrows pointing in specific directions. Marcus began to suspect the bear was trying to communicate, though he told no one about these encounters. In his family's current financial situation, the last thing he needed was a reputation for having an unhealthy obsession with wildlife. Eleanor grew suspicious when she noticed Marcus staying out later on his patrols. "You're spending too much time in those woods, son," she said one evening, her voice weak from her latest round of chemotherapy. "These mountains took your father. I won't let them take you too." But Martha seemed to understand something the others didn't. One morning, as Marcus prepared for another patrol, his grandmother handed him a small leather pouch. Inside were strips of dried venison. "Your grandfather used to say that some creatures choose their own families," Martha said, her weathered hands warm against his. "Maybe this bear chose you for a reason." She paused, studying his face with the wisdom of 7 decades. "Animals don't lie, Marcus. They love or they don't. If that bear trusts you, there's probably a good reason. The breakthrough came on a gray November morning when Marcus found the bear waiting for him at their usual meeting spot. But this time the animal had arranged dozens of stones in an unmistakable pattern, an arrow pointing deeper into the forest, toward an area Marcus rarely patrolled. Against every regulation and safety protocol he'd ever learned, Marcus followed. What the bear showed him that day would shatter everything Marcus thought he knew about his father's death, about the mountains he'd sworn to protect, and about the thin line between civilization and the wild places where ancient secrets still hid in the shadows. The bear led Marcus through terrain he'd never explored in 8 years of ranger work, a maze of granite outcroppings and hidden ravines that seemed to exist in the park's forgotten corners. After 2 miles of careful hiking, Scar, as Marcus had begun calling him, stopped abruptly and sat down, his massive head turning to look back at Marcus with unmistakable intent. At first, Marcus saw nothing unusual. Just another rocky clearing surrounded by towering pines, the kind of spot where elk might bed down for the night. But then Scar moved to a particular boulder and began pawing at the ground beneath it with deliberate precision. "What are you trying to show me, boy?" Marcus whispered, approaching cautiously. What he found buried beneath 6 inches of pine needles and dirt made his blood freeze. A canvas tarp, military green and professionally concealed, covered a cache of equipment that had no business being in a national park. Night vision scopes, tranquilizer dart guns, portable cages designed for large mammals, and most chilling of all, a collection of radio collars with serial numbers filed off. Marcus's hands trembled as he photographed everything with his phone. This wasn't casual poaching. This was a professional operation. As he documented the cache, something metallic caught his eye beneath the largest crate. A familiar object that made his world tilt sideways. His father's ranger badge, the one supposedly lost in the hunting accident 3 years ago. "Dad?" Marcus breathed, clutching the tarnished brass shield. Thomas Whitehorse had worn this badge for 22 years, never once taking it off duty. Finding it here, in this hidden cache of poaching equipment, meant everything Marcus had been told about his father's death was a lie. Scar watched silently as Marcus's composure crumbled. The bear seemed to understand that something momentous had happened, remaining perfectly still as Marcus fought back tears of rage and confusion. When Marcus finally composed himself enough to continue searching, he found something even more devastating. A waterproof journal wrapped in plastic, filled with his father's careful handwriting. Page after page documented an investigation into what Thomas called the Colorado Connection, a wildlife trafficking network that had been operating in the park for years. The entries painted a picture of Thomas Whitehorse as more than just a park ranger. He'd been conducting his own investigation into the disappearance of protected species, tracking down an operation that smuggled everything from bear gallbladders to elk antlers to international buyers willing to pay premium prices for American wildlife. But it was the final entry, dated just 3 days before Thomas's death, that made Marcus sink to his knees. "They know I'm close. Victor contacted me again today, offering twice as much money to forget what I've seen." When I refused, his tone changed. He mentioned Eleanor's medical bills, Marcus's future, said it would be a shame if anything happened to the family's provider. "I've hidden copies of everything in 3 locations. If something happens to me, maybe someone else can finish what I started. The most important evidence is with the only witness I trust completely, the bear cub I found orphaned last spring. That little fellow saw everything the night they killed his mother. Animals don't forget. And they don't lie." Marcus's vision blurred as the implications hit him. His father hadn't died in a hunting accident. He'd been murdered for trying to protect the very wildlife he'd sworn to serve. And somehow, impossibly, the bear sitting beside him was connected to it all. As if sensing Marcus's emotional turmoil, Scar moved closer and gently pressed his massive head against Marcus's shoulder. The gesture was so human, so full of understanding that Marcus couldn't hold back the sob that had been building in his chest. "You were there, weren't you?" Marcus whispered into the bear's fur. "You saw what happened to him." Scar pulled back and looked directly into Marcus's eyes, then walked to a nearby pine tree. With deliberate movements, he began clawing at the bark about 7 feet up, creating marks that looked disturbingly like bullet holes. The truth crystallized with horrible clarity. This bear hadn't just found the cache, he'd been protecting it, keeping his promise to a dead ranger who had shown him kindness. Thomas had been shot while investigating the poaching operation, and this cub had witnessed the murder of both his mother and his human protector. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, making both man and bear freeze. The number was unknown, but the message made his blood turn to ice. "Your father was stubborn too. Stop digging or you'll join him." Some family traditions should die out. A friend. Attached was a photo that made Marcus's world spin. Eleanor sitting in their kitchen that very morning, unaware that someone had been watching her through the window. Scar immediately tensed, his lips pulling back in a silent snarl as if he could sense the threat through Marcus's phone. The bear's reaction confirmed what Marcus already knew. They weren't alone in these woods. The same people who had killed his father were still out there, still watching, still threatening his family. "We need to get out of here," Marcus whispered, quickly reburying the cache and pocketing his father's badge. But as he turned to leave, he found himself face to face with a man he recognized from the photo in Victor's conservation group brochure. Jake Morrison, a fellow park ranger Marcus had worked alongside for 2 years, stood 20 yards away with a tranquilizer gun trained on Scar's. "Sorry, Marcus," Jake said, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine regret. "Nothing personal. But that bear knows too much, and so do you." The betrayal hit Marcus harder than any physical blow. Jake had been his friend, his colleague, someone he'd trusted with his life on dangerous rescues. And all along, he'd been working for the people who killed Thomas. Scar positioned himself between Marcus and Jake, his massive body radiating protective fury. The standoff lasted only seconds before the forest erupted in chaos that would change all their lives forever. The tranquilizer dart intended for Scar struck the pine tree behind them with a soft thunk as the massive bear charged. Jake Morrison dove sideways, fumbling to reload his weapon, but 400 pounds of enraged black bear moved faster than any human could react. Scar's massive paw sent Jake sprawling, the tranquilizer gun spinning away into the underbrush. "Don't move!" Marcus shouted, drawing his service weapon. But Jake was already scrambling toward a backup rifle hidden behind a fallen log. The shot that followed echoed through the canyon like thunder. Jake Morrison's body went limp, a spreading pool of crimson beneath his chest. But the shot hadn't come from Marcus's gun. It had come from somewhere in the trees above them. A voice called out, accented and familiar. "Lower your weapon, Ranger Whitehorse. You're surrounded." Viktor Kozlov emerged from the tree line with 3 armed men, each carrying military-grade hunting rifles. The Russian's silver hair was perfectly styled despite the wilderness setting, and his expensive outdoor gear marked him as someone who hunted for sport rather than survival. "Your colleague was becoming unreliable," Viktor said, gesturing dismissively at Jake's body. "Guilt makes men weak. Unlike your father, Jake was starting to grow a conscience." Marcus kept his gun raised, but his tactical training told him the situation was hopeless. Scar had positioned himself between Marcus and the armed men, hackles raised and teeth bared in a display of raw fury that made even the poachers step back nervously. "That bear needs to be eliminated," one of Victor's men said, raising his rifle. "It's witnessed too much." "No," Victor said sharply. "That animal is worth more alive than dead. Do you know how much collectors will pay for a trained black bear with that level of intelligence? 3 million, minimum. The word trained hit Marcus like a physical blow. My father trained him, didn't he? When he was a cub. Victor's smile was cold as winter. Thomas found that cub after we eliminated its mother for her gallbladder. Instead of letting nature take its course, he bottle-fed it, taught it to trust humans. Your father always was too sentimental for this business. This business? Marcus's voice cracked with rage. You mean murder? I prefer to think of it as resource management, Victor replied. North American wildlife fetches premium prices in certain markets. Bear gallbladders for traditional medicine, elk antlers for virility supplements, wolf pelts for fashion. Your father's national park was sitting on millions of dollars worth of inventory, and he refused to see the economic potential. Scar's growl deepened to a sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The bear's intelligent eyes darted between the armed men, clearly calculating odds and escape routes with an awareness that defied everything Marcus thought he knew about animal behavior. Thomas trained you well, didn't he, boy? Victor continued, studying Scar with professional interest. Taught you to recognize faces, to understand human speech patterns. I've been watching you both for months. That bear has been leading you to evidence caches, hasn't he? Using primitive communication to expose our operation. Marcus's mind raced, remembering all the stone arrangements, the deliberate way Scar had guided him to specific locations. He's been trying to finish what my father started. Exactly, which is why both of you have become problematic. Victor nodded to his men. Tranquilize the bear first. I want it alive and undamaged. The ranger? Well, accidents happen in these mountains. Wild animals can be unpredictable. The standoff was broken by an unexpected sound, the distant whine of helicopter rotors. Victor's expression darkened as the noise grew louder, clearly approaching their location. Sir, one of his men said urgently, that's a Park Service chopper. Victor's calculated composure cracked. Impossible. We have the ranger schedules. Marcus felt a surge of hope, even as he kept his weapon trained on the poachers. Someone had found them, but he had no idea who or how. The helicopter's sound grew closer, accompanied by the static crackle of radio communication. All units, this is Park Service Command. We have reports of gunfire in Sector 7. Marcus Whitehorse, respond if you can hear this. The voice belonged to Sarah Crow Feather, the park's chief veterinarian and one of the few people Marcus trusted completely. But how had she known where to look? Victor's men were growing nervous, glancing between their leader and the approaching aircraft. We need to move, sir. If they find us here with the weapons, we're not leaving without that bear, Victor snarled. Do you understand what 3 years of patience will cost us if we walk away empty-handed? Scar seemed to sense the shifting dynamics of the situation. The bear suddenly reared up on his hind legs, standing nearly 8 feet tall and roaring with a sound that Marcus felt in his bones. The display was so primal, so powerfully intimidating, that 2 of Victor's men actually stepped backward. Magnificent, Victor breathed, raising his own tranquilizer gun. Simply magnificent. The dart struck Scar in the shoulder and the massive bear staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he dropped to all fours and charged directly at Victor with the desperate fury of a creature fighting for its life. Chaos erupted in the clearing. Victor dove aside as Scar's massive paws churned the ground where he'd been standing. Marcus used the distraction to take cover behind a boulder, returning fire as Victor's men opened up with their rifles. The helicopter was close now, close enough that Marcus could see Sarah Crow Feather's face through the pilot's window, but even as hope surged in his chest, he watched Scar stumble, the tranquilizer beginning to take effect. "No!" Marcus shouted, breaking cover to run toward his wounded friend. A rifle bullet shattered bark inches from his head, but he kept running. Scar collapsed just as Marcus reached him, the bear's massive body going limp with devastating finality. But in those last conscious moments, Scar did something that would haunt Marcus forever. The bear pressed his nose into Marcus's palm and made a sound that could only be described as a goodbye. "The bear's down," one of Victor's men called out. "Loading it now?" Marcus watched helplessly as the poachers secured Scar with heavy chains, preparing to load him into a camouflaged ATV that had been hidden nearby. The helicopter was still minutes away, too far to prevent what was happening. "Your father died for nothing," Victor called out over the roar of the approaching aircraft. "And now his precious bear will spend the rest of its life in a concrete cage, performing tricks for rich collectors who've never seen a real wild animal." The ATV's engine roared to life, and Marcus realized with growing horror that they were going to escape. Scar's unconscious form was strapped to a trailer behind the vehicle, and Victor's men were already climbing aboard. But as the ATV pulled away, Marcus noticed something that filled him with grim satisfaction. In his final conscious moments, Scar had managed to dig his claws deep into Victor's leg, leaving bloody gouges that would make the Russian easy to track. The helicopter finally touched down in the clearing, but it was too late. Victor and his team had vanished into the maze of Forest Service roads that crisscrossed the backcountry. Sarah Crow. Feather jumped out before the rotors stopped spinning, her medical bag in hand. "Marcus, are you hit?" she called out, running toward him. "They took him," Marcus said, his voice hollow with defeat. "They took Scar." Sarah's expression was grim as she surveyed the scene. Jake Morrison's body, the blood trail where Scar had been dragged, the evidence of a firefight that had turned the peaceful clearing into a war zone. "How did you find me?" Marcus asked as Sarah checked him for injuries. "Your grandmother," Sarah replied. "Martha called and said you were in trouble, said she'd had a vision. Told me exactly where to look." She paused, studying the destruction around them. "What the hell happened here, Marcus?" As Marcus began to explain, he found himself looking toward the forest where Victor's ATV had disappeared. Somewhere out there, Scar was fighting for his life against tranquilizers and chains. And somewhere out there, the truth about his father's murder was getting further away with every passing minute, but the story was far from over. Hidden in his jacket pocket was his father's badge and the photographs he'd taken of the weapons cache. Victor might have won this battle, but the war for the soul of the wilderness was just beginning. The next 72 hours blurred together in a nightmare of federal investigators, crime scene analysts, and mounting desperation. Marcus sat in the park headquarters conference room, staring at a map covered in red pins marking possible locations where Victor might have taken Scar. Each pin represented another dead end, another trail gone cold. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos looked exhausted as she reviewed the case file for the 100th time. "We've got roadblocks on every highway within 100 miles, alerts at all airports and border crossings. But if they're using backcountry routes, they could be anywhere by now," Marcus finished, his voice hoarse from 3 days of constant briefings and search coordination. Sarah Crowfeather entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the grim expression that had become her permanent mask since the incident. "The blood trail from Victor's leg wound ends at Forest Service Road 47. They switched vehicles there." Marcus slammed his fist on the table, making the coffee cups jump. "My father spent 3 years gathering evidence on these people. 3 years, and we're letting them disappear because we can't track one wounded bear and a Russian with a limp." "Marcus," Agent Santos said gently, "I understand your frustration. But we're dealing with a sophisticated international organization. Viktor Kozlov isn't some amateur poacher. He's been running wildlife trafficking operations across 3 continents for over a decade." The conference room door opened, and Martha Stonecrow entered without invitation, her traditional beaded shawl draped over her shoulders and her weathered face set in lines of determination. At 77, Marcus's grandmother commanded respect wherever she went, and even the federal agents straightened in their chairs when she spoke. "You're all thinking like white men," Martha said without preamble, settling into a chair at the head of the table, looking at roads and vehicles and radio signals. "But that bear isn't just cargo to be transported. He's a living creature with his own will." Agent Santos leaned forward respectfully. "Mrs. Mo Stonecrow, I appreciate your insight, but we're working with physical evidence and established trafficking patterns." "Bullshit!" Martha interrupted, her profanity shocking everyone in the room. "My grandson and that bear have a connection that goes deeper than your federal procedures. You want to find Scar? Stop thinking like hunters and start thinking like family." Marcus looked up from the map, something stirring in the back of his mind. "What do you mean, Grandma?" Martha's eyes twinkled with the wisdom of 7 decades spent reading the natural world. "That bear has been trying to communicate with you for months, teaching you to pay attention to things you'd normally miss. You think that training stops just because some Russian put him in chains?" Before anyone could respond, Martha pulled out her cell phone, a battered flip phone that looked ancient but still worked perfectly. "I've been getting calls all morning from folks on the reservation. Strange things happening. Livestock acting spooked, dogs howling at nothing, eagles circling empty fields." Sarah leaned forward, her veterinary training engaging. "What kind of strange behavior?" "The kind that happens when a very large, very scared predator is being moved through territory where he doesn't belong," Martha replied. "Animals can sense fear and distress from miles away. If you map the reports chronologically." She spread a hand-drawn map on the table, marked with locations and times written in her careful script. The pattern that emerged made Marcus's heart race. "They're moving southeast," he breathed, "following the old mining roads toward the border." Agent Santos studied the map with growing excitement. "These reports create a clear trail. If your grandmother is right, they're heading for the abandoned Silverstone mine complex." Marcus was already standing, reaching for his gear. "That makes perfect sense. Silverstone's been closed for 15 years, completely off the radar. Perfect place to hide until they can arrange transport." "Wait," Sarah said, grabbing his arm. "We need backup, a tactical team. If Victor's operation is as sophisticated as Agent Santos says—" "There's no time," Marcus interrupted. "Every hour we wait is another hour Scar spends in captivity. My father died trying to stop these people. I won't let his sacrifice be meaningless." Martha stood and placed her weathered hands on Marcus's shoulders. "Your father's spirit walks with that bear, grandson, but spirits can't pull triggers or cut chains. That's work for the living." Agent Santos was already on her radio, coordinating with tactical units. "We can have a team at Silverstone in 2 hours. But Marcus, you need to understand, if we go in there and Victor's people start shooting, that bear could get caught in the crossfire." The terrible truth of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Any rescue attempt carried the risk of getting Scar killed, but leaving him in Victor's hands meant a lifetime of captivity, or worse. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. The message was brief but chilling. "Your bear is awake and not happy. Seems he remembers our previous encounter. Thought you might like to say goodbye before we ship him overseas. Come alone to Silverstone or watch him die on livestream. You have 1 hour." Attached was a video that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. Scar was chained inside what looked like a mining shaft, his massive body barely fitting in the concrete-walled space. The bear's eyes were alert but filled with a rage that seemed barely contained. Victor's voice could be heard off camera, taunting the trapped animal. "He's been asking for you, Ranger Whitehorse. Bears don't forget their friends, or their enemies. The video cut off abruptly, leaving Marcus staring at a black screen that reflected his own desperate face. "It's a trap," Agent Santos said immediately. "Classic hostage exchange scenario. He's counting on your emotional attachment to that animal." "Of course it's a trap," Marcus replied, checking his service weapon and emergency supplies. "But it's also our only chance to save Scar before they move him again." Sarah grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Marcus, you can't seriously be considering this. Victor killed your father. You think he'll hesitate to kill you too?" "Maybe not," Marcus admitted, "but I think he wants me alive long enough to watch Scar suffer." "That gives me a window." Martha had been silent during this exchange, but now she spoke with the authority of someone who had seen too much death and loss in her long life. "Sometimes the spirits ask us to walk into the darkness to bring light back out. Your father walked that path. Now it's your turn." Agent Santos tried one more time to dissuade him. "We'll have tactical support within 90 minutes. Can't you wait?" "You heard the message," Marcus interrupted. 1 hour, by the time your tactical team gets there, Scar will be dead or gone." He was halfway to the door when Martha called out behind him, "Marcus, your father's badge isn't the only thing he left you." She pressed something into his palm, a small leather pouch that felt warm to the touch. Inside was a handful of what looked like ordinary river stones, each one smooth and perfectly round. Cherokee wisdom says that some stones hold the memory of water, and water always finds its way home, Martha said softly. "Your father carried these stones for 20 years. Maybe it's time they found their way back to the river." Marcus didn't understand what she meant, but he pocketed the stones anyway. Every Cherokee teaching he'd learned as a child suggested there was more to this gift than met the eye. As he climbed into his truck, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked exhausted, desperate, and possibly about to make the last mistake of his life. But behind his own face he could almost see another reflection, his father's determined expression on the day he'd decided to stand up to Victor Kozlov. The drive to Silverstone would take 45 minutes on the winding mountain roads. 45 minutes to figure out how to save a 400-pound bear from an international crime syndicate with nothing but his service weapon, his wits, and a handful of memory stones his grandmother claimed held ancient power. As Marcus pulled out of the parking lot, he had no idea that his phone was transmitting his location to Agent Santos's tactical team, or that Sarah Crow Feather was following him in her own vehicle, or that his grandmother Martha was making phone calls to every native tracker within 50 miles of Silverstone. The final confrontation was about to begin, and none of them were going into it alone. The abandoned Silverstone mine complex sprawled across a scarred mountainside like the remnants of a mechanical beast. Rusted conveyor belts snaked between crumbling concrete buildings, and gaping mine shafts disappeared into the earth like hungry mouths. Marcus parked his truck at the main gate, noting the fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Victor's people had definitely been here recently. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the whisper of wind through abandoned structures and the distant drip of water from somewhere deep underground. Marcus checked his weapon one final time, then began walking toward the largest building, a processing facility that would provide perfect cover for Victor's operation. He'd made it halfway across the compound when Victor's voice echoed from speakers hidden throughout the complex. "Welcome to Silverstone, Ranger Whitehorse. I trust you came alone as instructed." "I'm here," Marcus called out. "Now, show me Scar." A spotlight blazed to life, illuminating a platform built over the main mine shaft. Scar was there, chained to a steel framework that held him suspended above the black abyss below. The bear was conscious and clearly agitated, struggling against bonds that looked strong enough to hold a truck. "Your friend is remarkably resilient," Victor's voice continued. "The tranquilizer should have kept him unconscious for hours, but he fought it off in 90 minutes. Impressive, but also inconvenient." Marcus could see 3 armed men positioned around the platform, their rifles trained on Scar. Any rescue attempt would put the bear directly in the line of fire. Victor had chosen his position perfectly. "What do you want?" Marcus shouted. Victor emerged from behind a concrete barrier, his expensive outdoor gear now torn and blood-stained from Scar's claws. He walked with a noticeable limp, and Marcus felt a savage satisfaction seeing the Russian's pain. "What I want is simple," Victor replied. "Your father cost me 3 years of careful planning and approximately $7 million in lost revenue. I want that debt paid." "My father's dead. You can't collect from a dead man." Victor's laugh was cold as winter wind. "But I can collect from his son. You have 2 choices, Marcus. Join my organization as your colleague Jake Morrison did, or watch that bear fall into a mine shaft so deep we'll never find the bottom." The platform creaked ominously as Scar struggled against his chains. The bear's eyes found Marcus across the distance, and for a moment man and animal shared a look of perfect understanding. Scar wasn't afraid. He was furious. "You're insane if you think I'll help you," Marcus said. "Insane?" Victor shrugged. "Perhaps, but also practical. Your Park Service salary is what, $60,000 a year? I can offer you that much per month with bonuses for special assignments. Think about your mother's medical bills, Marcus. Think about losing the family cabin." The words hit harder than Marcus expected. Eleanor's cancer treatments had already bankrupted them once, and the doctors had warned that the disease could return. Without insurance coverage for experimental treatments, they'd be right back where they started. "I see I have your attention," Victor continued. "Your father was offered the same deal, you know. He chose principles over pragmatism. Look how that ended." "You murdered him," Marcus snarled. "I defended myself when he tried to arrest me," Victor corrected. "Self-defense is hardly murder. But let's not dwell on the past. I'm offering you a chance to honor your father's memory by ensuring his family's survival." Above them, Scar's struggles were becoming more desperate. The chains holding him creaked and groaned, but they were industrial grade, designed to hold much more weight than even a 400-pound bear could generate. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Without taking his eyes off Victor, he glanced at the screen. The text was from Agent Santos. "Tactical Team ETA 20 minutes. Keep him talking." 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. Victor was growing impatient, and the platform holding Scar looked increasingly unstable. "Time's running out, Marcus," Victor called. "My buyers in Shanghai are expecting delivery within the week. That bear will bring $3 million on the exotic animal market, dead or alive." Dead or alive? Marcus felt sick. Live animals are worth more, naturally, but preserved specimens have their own market. Wealthy collectors pay premium prices for trophy pieces from extinct species. Victor gestured toward Scar with casual cruelty. "Your friend there represents the last of his bloodline, a pure Colorado black bear with documented intelligence capabilities. Quite valuable either way." The platform groaned again, and one of the chains holding Scar suddenly snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The bear dropped several inches, now suspended by only 2 points instead of 3. His roar of rage echoed through the entire complex. "Oops," Victor said with mock concern. "Perhaps we should expedite this negotiation." Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. The tactical team was still 15 minutes away. Scar's remaining chains wouldn't hold much longer under his struggling, and Victor's men had clear shots at both of them from multiple angles. That's when he remembered Martha's gift. The Cherokee memory stones felt warm in his pocket, and suddenly his grandmother's words took on new meaning. Water always finds its way home. Marcus looked more carefully at the complex around them. Silverstone had been a hydraulic mining operation using high-pressure water to blast ore from the mountainside. The facility would be riddled with water pipes and drainage systems, many of them probably still functional. "All right," Marcus called out, raising his hands in apparent surrender. "You win. I'll join your organization." Victor smiled triumphantly. "Excellent choice. Walk slowly toward the platform, hands visible at all times." As Marcus approached, he palmed one of Martha's stones and studied the platform more carefully. A thick water pipe ran directly beneath it, disappearing into the mine shaft. If the pipe was still under pressure— "Stop there," Victor commanded when Marcus was within 20 feet of the platform. "Now drop your weapon and kick it away." Marcus complied, letting his service pistol slide across the concrete. But as he bent to remove it from his holster, he managed to wedge Martha's stone into a joint in the water pipe below. The Cherokee elders had taught him that river stones held more than just memory. They held pressure, the accumulated force of countless years of flowing water. And pressure, properly applied, could move mountains. "Now what?" Marcus asked, straightening slowly. "Now you watch your friend fall," Victor said with savage satisfaction. "Did you really think I'd honor any agreement with the son of the man who destroyed my operation?" Victor nodded to his men, who began cutting the remaining chains, holding Scar above the mine shaft. The bear's roar of fury turned into something else. A sound Marcus had never heard before, almost like a desperate call for help. That's when the water pipe exploded. The stone Martha had given him acted like a perfect plug in an imperfect seal. Decades of mineral buildup and pressure found sudden release through the weakened joint, sending a geyser of water shooting upward with tremendous force. The blast caught the platform from below, tilting it sideways and sending Victor's men scrambling for safety. Scar, still chained but no longer suspended over empty space, crashed onto the tilted platform with an impact that shook the entire structure. The bear immediately began working at his remaining bonds with both teeth and claws, his intelligence allowing him to target the weakest links. Victor raised his own rifle, aiming at Marcus. "You think you're clever? That bear is still chained, my men are still armed, and you're still going to die." But Victor had underestimated both Marcus's desperation and Scar's determination. The bear snapped his final chain just as Victor pulled the trigger, and 400 pounds of enraged black bear launched itself directly at the Russian. The shot went wide, embedding itself in concrete as Victor disappeared beneath a mountain of fur and fury. His screams were cut short by sounds that Marcus tried not to think about too carefully. The remaining gunmen opened fire, but their shots went high as they tried to avoid hitting their employer. Scar rolled away from Victor's motionless form and charged the nearest shooter, moving with a speed that defied his massive size. In the chaos that followed, Marcus retrieved his weapon and found cover behind a concrete barrier. The complex echoed with gunfire, inhuman roars, and the sound of running water from the broken pipe. When the shooting finally stopped, Marcus emerged to find Scar standing over the last of Victor's men, the bear's massive chest heaving with exhaustion and adrenaline. The platform was destroyed, the mine shaft partially flooded, and Victor Kozlov was nowhere to be seen. But their ordeal was far from over. The sound of approaching sirens shattered the eerie quiet that had settled over the Silverstone complex. Marcus stood frozen beside the destroyed platform, his service weapon still drawn, staring at the scene of devastation around him. 3 of Victor's men lay motionless among the wreckage, and Scar sat nearby, blood matting his fur from multiple bullet wounds. But it was what Scar was guarding that made Marcus's world collapse. Victor Kozlov hung halfway over the edge of the flooded mine shaft, his expensive jacket caught on a twisted piece of rebar. He was alive, barely conscious, but his legs dangled into the black water below. Blood streamed from deep claw marks across his face and chest, and his left arm bent at an unnatural angle. "Help me," Victor gasped, his voice barely audible over the sound of rushing water. Marcus approached slowly, his weapon trained on the wounded Russian. Every instinct screamed at him to let Victor fall, to let the mine shaft swallow the man who had murdered his father and terrorized his family. Justice served by gravity and dark water. "Please," Victor wheezed, his grip on the rebar weakening. I'm dying." Scar watched the exchange with those unnaturally intelligent eyes. His massive head tilted as if waiting to see what Marcus would choose. The bear's breathing was labored, and Marcus could see at least 2 bullet wounds that needed immediate medical attention. The sirens were getting closer. Agent Santos and her tactical team would arrive within minutes, along with Sarah Crow Feather and whatever medical support she could provide. All Marcus had to do was wait, and Victor Kozlov would disappear into the depths of an abandoned mine shaft, taking his secrets with him. But as Victor's grip failed and he slipped another inch toward the black water, Marcus found himself moving. Not toward safety, not toward revenge, but toward the edge of the shaft. "Don't," he said, extending his hand. "I've got you." Victor's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why?" Marcus grasped the Russian's wrist, just as his hold on the rebar gave way completely. The additional weight nearly pulled Marcus over the edge, but Scar immediately moved forward, using his massive bulk to brace Marcus against the concrete. "Because my father taught me that a man is measured by what he chooses to preserve, not what he chooses to destroy," Marcus grunted, hauling Victor up from the brink. As soon as Victor was on solid ground, he collapsed, his injuries finally overwhelming his stubborn will to survive. Marcus quickly secured the Russian's weapon and checked his pulse, weak but steady. "You saved me," Victor whispered, his voice filled with genuine confusion. "After everything I've done, why?" Before Marcus could answer, the first FBI vehicles roared into the complex. Agent Santos emerged from the lead car with her weapon drawn, followed by a tactical team that immediately began securing the area. "Marcus!" Sarah Crow Feather called out, running toward them with her veterinary supplies. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied, stepping back as the medics took over Victor's care. "But Scar needs help. He's been shot at least twice." Sarah was already examining the bear, her experienced hands probing for serious injuries. Scar remained perfectly still during her examination, as if he understood that she was trying to help him. 2 through-and-through wounds, both missing vital organs, Sarah reported. "He's lost blood, but nothing life-threatening if we get him proper treatment." Agent Santos approached cautiously, her eyes taking in the destruction around them. "What happened here, Marcus?" As Marcus explained the confrontation, Victor drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words that made the federal agents lean closer. What they heard would change everything they thought they knew about the case. "Eleanor had to protect Eleanor," Victor whispered during one lucid moment. Agent Santos exchanged glances with Marcus. "What's he talking about?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, but a cold dread was forming in his stomach. Victor's eyes focused with effort, finding Marcus's face among the crowd of law enforcement officers. "Your mother, she called me that night." "You're delirious," Marcus said, but even as he spoke, pieces of a horrible puzzle were clicking together in his mind. "No," Victor wheezed. "She called, warned me your father was coming, said she couldn't lose the cabin, couldn't lose everything." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His mother had called Victor the night his father died, had warned the poachers that Thomas was coming for them. "He's lying," Marcus said desperately, but Agent Santos was already on her radio requesting a warrant for Eleanor Whitehorse's phone records. Victor managed a weak smile through his pain. "Check the calls. October 15th, 3 years ago, 11:47 p.m. She begged me not to hurt him, just to scare him." Marcus felt the world spinning around him. His mother's reaction when he'd started investigating his father's death. Her constant warnings about the dangers of the mountains, her desperate concern about their financial situation. It all took on a sinister new meaning. "But you killed him anyway," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "No," Victor replied, his breathing becoming more labored. "I never meant for him to die. Wanted to pay him off, make him disappear for a while. Let the operation finish." Agent Santos knelt beside Victor, her recording device capturing every word. What happened that night? Thomas wouldn't listen, pulled his weapon. Jake Morrison panicked, shot him. Victor's eyes found Marcus again. "I tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. Your father died calling your mother's name." The revelation shattered something fundamental in Marcus's understanding of his world. His mother hadn't just betrayed his father. She'd set in motion the events that led to his death. And she'd spent 3 years letting Marcus believe it was an accident, watching him grieve for a man whose death she'd helped cause. "Why?" Marcus whispered. "Why would she do that?" Victor's voice was fading, but he managed a few more words. "Cancer, medical bills, losing the house. She thought, one job, enough money to save everything." He coughed, blood speckling his lips. She never wanted him to die, just wanted him to stop being a hero. Sarah Crowe. Feather had been listening to the exchange while treating Scar's wounds, and now she looked up with tears in her eyes. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." But Marcus was already walking away, his phone in his hand, dialing his mother's number. The call went straight to voicemail, and when he tried the house phone, it just rang endlessly. "Agent Santos," he called out, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "I need to get home. Now." "Marcus, wait," Agent Santos said, following him toward the vehicles. "Let us handle this professionally. Don't confront your mother alone." "She's my mother," Marcus replied, but the words felt strange in his mouth. "Whatever she's done, she's still my mother." Scar had been watching this exchange from where Sarah was bandaging his wounds, and now the massive bear stood up despite his injuries. He walked over to Marcus and gently pressed his head against the man's leg, offering comfort in the only way he could. "He knows you're hurting," Sarah said softly. "Animals can sense emotional pain as clearly as physical pain." Marcus knelt and wrapped his arms around Scar's massive neck, breathing in the bear's wild scent and trying to process the magnitude of what he'd learned. His father hadn't died as a hero protecting the wilderness. He'd died because his own wife had betrayed him to criminals. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Marcus whispered into Scar's fur. The bear pulled back and looked directly into Marcus's eyes, then did something that would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. Scar gently picked up one of the fallen Cherokee stones with his teeth and placed it in Marcus's palm, then pressed his massive paw over Marcus's hand. The gesture was so unmistakably deliberate, so clearly intended as comfort, that even the hardened federal agent stood watching in amazement. "That bear understands more than we give him credit for," Agent Santos said quietly. As the medical helicopter arrived to transport Victor to a trauma center, Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would go home and confront his mother, but he wouldn't go alone. Scar had earned the right to be part of whatever came next. The truth about Thomas Whitehorse's death was finally coming to light. But Marcus was about to discover that some truths cut deeper than any physical wound, and that the line between victim and perpetrator wasn't always as clear as he'd believed. The drive home felt like traveling through a nightmare that kept shifting and changing with each mile. Marcus gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white, while Scar sat in the passenger seat of the Park Service truck, his bandaged wounds a stark reminder of how close they'd both come to death. Sarah Crowe Feather had insisted on following in her own vehicle, unwilling to let either of them face what was coming alone. The Whitehorse family cabin sat in its familiar clearing, looking exactly as it had that morning when Marcus left for what he thought would be a routine patrol. Eleanor's car was in the driveway, and warm light glowed from the kitchen windows, creating an illusion of normalcy that made Marcus's stomach churn with dread. "You don't have to do this today," Sarah said as they parked. "Your mother isn't going anywhere, and you've been through enough trauma." "No," Marcus interrupted, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotional pain. "3 years of lies is enough. I need to know the truth." Scar climbed carefully out of the truck, his movements stiff but determined. The bear had refused to stay at the veterinary clinic, somehow understanding that Marcus needed him for whatever was about to happen. Together, the three of them walked toward the front door. Eleanor Whitehorse opened it before they could knock, as if she'd been watching from the window. At 58, cancer and chemotherapy had aged her beyond her years, but it was the look in her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. She knew. Somehow she already knew why they were there. "Marcus," she said softly, her gaze shifting to Scar with something that might have been fear. "You found him. We need to talk, Mom." Eleanor stepped aside, allowing them into the living room where 3 generations of Whitehorse family photos lined the mantelpiece. Marcus had looked at those pictures thousands of times, but now they seemed like evidence of a life built on lies. Martha Stonecrow emerged from the kitchen, her weathered face grave with knowledge. "I've been waiting for this day for 3 years," she said simply, "waiting for the truth to come home." "You knew?" Marcus asked, turning to face his grandmother. "I suspected," Martha replied. "Your mother's grief was real, but it was mixed with something else. Guilt has a particular scent, grandson. It clings to a person like smoke." Eleanor sank into her favorite chair, the one where she'd sat through countless chemotherapy recovery sessions and buried her face in her hands. "I never meant for him to die. You have to believe that." "Tell me what happened," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "All of it." Eleanor's hands trembled as she began to speak. "The cancer came back worse than before. The doctor said I had maybe 6 months without the experimental treatment, but insurance wouldn't cover it. We were going to lose everything, the house, the land, your future. Your father was so focused on his investigation, on saving animals, that he couldn't see his own family was drowning." Scar had positioned himself between Marcus and Eleanor, as if sensing the emotional tension in the room. The bear's presence seemed to give Marcus strength to hear what came next. "Victor approached me first," Eleanor continued, "said he knew about our financial problems, that he could help. All I had to do was tell him when Thomas was getting close to their operation. Just a warning, nothing more. He promised no one would get hurt." "But you called him the night Dad died," Marcus said. "Thomas found something that day. I could see it in his face when he came home. He was going to arrest Victor that night, shut down the whole operation. I panicked. We needed that money, Marcus. Without it, I was going to die and leave you with nothing but debt and grief." Martha's voice cut through the confession like a blade. "So you chose to betray your husband instead of trusting him to find another way." "There was no other way." Eleanor's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face. "You think I wanted to betray him? You think I wanted to live with this guilt? I called Victor to warn him, yes, but I begged him not to hurt Thomas. I thought they would just delay him, maybe stage a breakdown of their equipment, buy time to move the operation. But Dad wouldn't back down," Marcus said, the pieces finally falling into place. "He was so stubborn," Eleanor sobbed. "Even when Jake Morrison pulled that gun, Thomas wouldn't stop. He kept advancing, kept demanding they surrender. Jake panicked and fired, and your father, he called out my name as he died. He knew. Somehow, he knew I had betrayed him." The silence that followed was broken only by Eleanor's quiet weeping and the sound of Scar's heavy breathing. Marcus felt as if his entire foundation had crumbled, leaving him standing on nothing but air. "The medical bills," Sarah said quietly. "That's why you couldn't afford to refuse Victor's money." "I took it," Eleanor whispered. "After Thomas died, Victor said it was the least he could do. Blood money for my husband's life, and I took it because I was weak and scared and didn't want to die leaving Marcus with nothing." Martha moved to her son's favorite chair and sat down heavily, her age suddenly showing in every line of her face. "Thomas died believing his wife had betrayed him. That's a wound that cuts deeper than any bullet." Marcus found himself kneeling beside Scar, his hands buried in the bear's thick fur, drawing comfort from the animal's steady presence. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me spend 3 years thinking it was an accident?" "Because I'm a coward," Eleanor replied simply. "Because I couldn't bear to see the look in your eyes when you learned what I'd done. Because I hoped I could live with the secret and spare you the pain of knowing." "But the secret was killing you anyway," Sarah observed. "Guilt is its own kind of cancer." Eleanor looked up at her son, her eyes red with tears but clear for the first time in years. "I know you can never forgive me. I know I've destroyed our family just as surely as I destroyed your father. But I need you to know that not a day has passed when I haven't regretted that phone call, not a single day when I haven't wished I could trade places with him." Marcus stood slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. The woman sitting before him was still his mother, still the person who had raised him and loved him and sacrificed for him. But she was also the person who had betrayed his father and lived with that betrayal for 3 years. Scar pressed against his leg, offering silent support, and Marcus realized that the bear understood loss and betrayal in ways that humans rarely could. Scar had watched his own mother die, had witnessed the destruction of his family, but had still chosen to trust and protect when given the chance. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Marcus said finally. "I don't even know if I should try. But I know Dad wouldn't want me to carry hatred for the rest of my life." Eleanor's sob was audible across the room. "He was a better man than I deserved." "Yes," Martha said simply. "He was." As the evening light faded outside the cabin windows, 4 beings, 3 human and 1 wild, sat together in the ruins of what had once been their family, each of them forever changed by the truth that had finally come home. Sometimes the hardest truths come wrapped in the deepest love. As Marcus sat in that cabin, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he thought he knew, he realized that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about choosing love despite it. Eleanor's betrayal had cost them everything, but her love for her family, however misguided, had been real. Martha's weathered hands found both her grandsons and daughter-in-laws, creating a circle that had been broken but wasn't beyond repair. "Your daddy used to say that families are like rivers," she whispered. "Sometimes they get diverted by rocks and storms, but they always find their way back to where they belong." Scar pressed closer to Marcus, this wild creature who had lost his own family but had chosen to protect his new one. In that moment, Marcus understood that healing doesn't erase scars. It transforms them into reminders of what we've survived together. As autumn light filtered through the cabin windows, 3 generations began the long journey toward rebuilding what love and loss and terrible choices had torn apart. Because sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most broken beginnings. What moments in your own family's story taught you that love can survive even the deepest betrayals? Have you ever had to choose between forgiveness and justice when someone you loved hurt you? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.